welcome to Conversations with Agents of Change, the podcast where we sit down with people who are quietly and sometimes boldly reshaping systems, communities, and lives for the better. Today's conversation is about power. Who holds it? Who is heard? And what happens when leadership genuinely centers the people it exists to serve. I'm joined by Janet Schofield, CEO of CAN, the Compass Advocacy Network, a unique user-led charity based in Ballymoney, Northern Ireland. Janet leads with a simple but radical principle: nothing about us without us. Under her leadership, CAN has become a powerful example of how small organizations can create big impact, supporting people with leading disabilities, autism, mental ill health to gain skills, confidence, work experience, and real control over their lives. Janet, welcome to Conversations with Agents of Change. It's such a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Janet, I'd love to start with you. You describe yourself as a practical optimist and also as an accidental CEO. Can you take us back a little to share with us what led you into this work and how you found yourself leading CAN?
So, cut a very long story short, I went to university in Newcastle upon Tyne in the north of England and studied arts, and actually left with a master's in arts and cultural management and fell into a gallery. And it wasn't an ordinary kind of white box gallery. It was very much a gallery that was connected. And the lady who ran it, Rashida Davison, was an inspiration in that she'd been a nurse herself, had no kind of traditional academic background. She just wanted to basically bring the arts to a place called North Shields in the northeast of England, which at the time was quite run down. There had been riots in Meadowell a number of years earlier, and it was seen as kind of the poor relative to the nice affluent areas at the coast. And Rashida had a vision. At the time, it was 1996, which was the year of the visual arts, Gateshead and Newcastle. The gallery had only been open a year, and I had basically got involved through my master's degree and fell in love really with that whole community ethos. And it was a way of marrying sort of my arts and creativity alongside, we were working with individuals with drug and alcohol problems. We were working with Royal Institute of British Architects. We were working with women who, for whatever reason, were out of the workplace. It was just such a mixing pot. And I just fell in love with it. And I fell in love with the whole kind of, working with people, but also bringing some light into what could have been dark times for them. So I suppose that started me on a journey of looking at work in the community voluntary sector. By this stage, I planned to be the CEO of the Baltic in Newcastle. Mm-hmm. So it's just funny how accidentally you go down a different path. So basically found a job with Disability North, which was a major regional disability organisation in Newcastle, and was offered a job as a fundraiser. I'm absolutely appalling at asking for money. I'm absolutely dreadful. I think if I had a tin in front of me, people would walk the other direction. So I had to find my way and navigate how I was going to raise money while also not terrifying and stepping out of my comfort zone. So it became a very transactional thing. So my first event actually was an abseil from the Tyne Bridge. And as somebody who's terrified of heights, it actually was blown away by the amount of money that I raised in that event. It was about £25,000, which at that time was a massive amount of money. And I actually put myself off the bridge as well. So it's just absolute fear, but I just felt this is amazing. People will do this to raise money for disability. So within 6 months, to cut a long story short, I was offered a job as the manager in the marketing department in charge of the fundraising and marketing and events. So I stayed at Disability North for about 9 years. And during that time, I was running events and exhibitions. I was also working, doing disability equality training. I was involved in different projects with disabled people. And again, just accidentally fell into a world that I just felt like I'd found my place. So then my husband at the time, we always had this thing that he worked for corporates and the bad boys. And I was trying to kind of, yin and yang, balance that out. By working for charities. Andy was working away in a company called Wrexham, and he was working all over the world. He was actually based in the south of France. And around that time, my grandma had died, and my next door neighbour, Carol, who was in her 80s and she kind of adopted me as Geordie grandma, passed away. And the comparison between Carol's funeral and my grandma's funeral was just so stark. You know, this is a woman who's lived in this area all her life in North Shields. She lived 2 doors down from me, and I went to her funeral. There was about 9 people there in a cemetery in North Shields, not far from where we lived. Yet when I went to my granny's funeral a few weeks in between, the whole of Macrofeld came out to see her off. And it was just that comparison between the two. And I suppose it started a yearning for home.
Yeah.
And at the time, my daughter Megan was 2, and I wanted her to have that sense of community when she was growing up. And I was very conscious that we were looking at schools, and so we moved home. When I came home, I had this dream that I would go back into the arts because I'd always stayed involved in the gallery. I'm still involved in the gallery to today, all these years later. I had this dream that I'd go back into the arts, and I quickly learned that the arts in Northern Ireland wasn't quite as progressive. A lot of the arts institutions, the galleries, etc., are still in council buildings. A lot of the arts and culture was based around Derry or Belfast, and I was wanting to live in the North Coast. So started to look for jobs closer to home. I did a few different kind of things, worked for Young Enterprise for about 6 months and applied for a job as a project manager at this organisation called Compass Advocacy Network. Ballymoney. Had no idea what they did or anything about them, apart from that they were looking for a project manager to make sure that they could enable the voice of people with learning disabilities. And the day that I went into the interview, it was a full panel of adults with learning disabilities. I just fell in love with the whole ethos around the organisation. And it had actually been a really inspirational woman called Sheila Stewart who'd set up the organisation as essentially an advocacy group for Triangle Housing Association. And the group quickly decided that they wanted to keep this going, apart from being a tenants group for the housing association. They actually wanted to have more of an impact. And when you think back to that time, you know, we still had institutions in Northern Ireland. Muckamore, albeit that it's still there, and there are some individuals that are still living in Muckamore who are in transition out into the community. Muckamore at that time was alive and well, and people were living, people with learning disabilities were still locked away. So I just thought this is wonderful, you know, that these people have their voice, and I really want to help amplify it.
Absolutely.
So started with CAN. There was only a team of 4. I got the job in January, and I knew that I had to raise my salary by Christmas. So it was a bit of a baptism of fire, really. And working alongside my colleagues, one of whom absolutely detested me, couldn't understand why this woman was coming in with all her grandiose ideas about taking CAN forward. She still works with me today and is my biggest ally.
Yeah.
Between the two of us, we realised that we needed to start to grow the organisation. Around that time, there was a big movement around reducing waste from landfill. So learning disability and the environmental piece just felt right. People were coming out into society. We wanted people with learning disabilities to be seen as active participants in society, not passive recipients of benefits. The environment was a big hot topic at the time, and we thought, well, why don't we marry the two? So we applied for funding, and we got our first vehicle, which was changed to be environmentally friendly. We started to get some textile banks out in the community, and we started collecting textiles. And the idea was that our adults with learning disabilities would go out, collect the textiles, bring them back, process them, and then we would sell any of the good quality stuff in a shop that we had at the time called the Daisy Chain. So that's really where the whole ethos of CAN started. So there was very much a kind of pushing forward people's voices and making sure that people's voices were heard, while also making sure that people were seen as active citizens and pushing back on those misconceptions that people with learning disabilities just lived on benefits, went to day centres, didn't contribute much to society. And that's really where it started. And I've been there now since 2003. Over that period, we've grown fairly significantly. We've gone from 4 staff to now 37 staff. And our impact similarly has grown. At the start, we were only working with adults with learning disabilities who were doing the processing in the social enterprise end of things, and then also having advocacy groups all over Northern Ireland, right through to now, where we have a whole system of programmes from age 8 up to 83, where we're supporting individuals on their journey through life. Over the last number of years, we've really seen that the need is increasing. We've got more people with learning disabilities coming through. We've got more individuals with neurodiversities, with challenging behaviours coming through our school systems. And we want to be able to provide support for them. A lot of families were coming to us and saying, you know, what happens when Johnny leaves school? And we were saying, well, you know, there will be support in this place, but in Northern Ireland, a lot of it is around postcode lottery. And I suppose over the years, we've had lots of opportunities to expand our services and go into different geographical areas. But we, and my board in particular, have always felt that it's about growing our roots and doing more with the people that we have, as opposed to spreading it thin.
Yeah.
So we very much focused on the north coast of Northern Ireland. We work Ballymoney, Ballymena, Coleraine. We have textile banks right through to Limavady, over to Ballycastle, and we work with people from that entire kind of area. But similarly, we make sure that we have a voice, and we're very much involved at political level. We're part of the all-party group in learning disability. Our adults with learning disabilities are frequent flyers at Stormont, telling their stories, making sure that their voices are heard and campaigning for real change. So there's a whole raft of stuff that's going on there, from political lobbying, working with the Department of Health, through to providing very practical services on the ground for children aged 8 up to our oldest is 83 and still going strong, and making sure that there will be then in the future provision for those young children when they come into adult services. So a big focus in the last number of years, in addition to the environmental piece, which we've continued to grow through our social enterprises. We've now got 3 shops called Can Bazaar in Ballymoney, Ballymena and Coleraine, and we've continued to collect from over 57 textile banks throughout the Causeway Coast area. We bring back the clothing, we process it, and then we put it into our shops. Best quality stuff goes into our shops. The rest goes for recycling. In 2021, coming out of the back of COVID, we purchased a farm. And that farm has provided the kind of model for the sustainability going forward, to make sure that Can is continuing to generate its own income and is able to be master of its own destiny to a certain extent going forward. So we're less privy to the kind of flux in funding that other organisations fall foul of.
Oh my goodness, that is an amazing journey, so inspiring, and I just felt my skin go goosebump because, you know, I love the way you have managed to bring all that together, from practical help to lobbying, which I think is extremely important. And I was going to ask that Can is often described as a small organization with a big impact. And what really stands out is that it's user-led, which I absolutely love. And for listeners who might not be familiar with that model, can you explain what user-led actually looks like in practice at Can?
So like I said, there's been lots of opportunities over the years to get bigger and to spread our geography. And we very much resisted that. We just wanted to do better with what we had. And that's because our people are at the core of everything that we do. Even as a CEO and in the senior management team, we're still down in the grass. Yeah. We're making sure that we're spending time with our adults with learning disabilities, that they have a voice and that they co-produce any of the programmes that we deliver. And an example of that would be our Blast project, which very much came from a parent that I had got to know through my own children, who had a daughter with a learning disability, at the time kind of undiagnosed, but developmental delay. And she said, you know, I worry about my daughter. I worry about what she's going to have outside of school. I worry about her being able to socialise, about being able to get through all the different traumas in her life. And we actually sat down with that parent and we looked at what could we create to fill that gap. And at the time, we were working with children aged 12 up to young people up to 25. And we actually revised our mem and arts because we realised that by the time the children were coming to us at 12, it was nearly too late. That they'd gone through already 2 major transitions, one being moving from primary school into secondary school, and the other being that they'd hit the teenage years and they were starting to go into puberty and become young adults. So we actually changed our mem and arts to meet the gap, and we designed that program, and we co-produced that program and co-designed that program with that family, because we knew there were other families out there, and we did a lot of work just talking to individuals, talking to families about what would really make the difference. And Blast was born and was funded through the National Lottery. It basically delivers an intervention to children aged 8 up in arts, play therapy, equine therapy and craft. And it's very much nature-based. And one of the beauties of, having purchased the farm, we were able to generate income from the land and provide opportunities for training. But it was also that we were able to take real advantage of the power of nature for those children. And it has been absolutely transformational for our work and for our impact.
I love that, because at the end of the day, it's like these like children and all of us, we thrive when we touch soil. I believe that.
Oh, absolutely.
So from gardening to playing outdoors, and as you said, like
Yeah.
having fun with the horses or
Yeah.
people around. So
And similarly for our adults as well. I mean, it's just been amazing because we used to have premises down at the train station in Ballymoney, and you could have had 2 individuals who clashed personality, and they were on the shop floor and they were sorting the clothing or whatever. And they would have kicked off. It would have got quite aggressive, and you spent a lot of time managing behaviour. Whereas when you're on the farm, you're out in fresh air. You can be 2 fields apart. One can be cutting grass and the other can be trimming a hedge. And the reality is that tension never builds. And because you're in the fresh air as well, you're getting the therapeutic benefit of being out in nature. But also, you're tired by the time you go home at night. So that tension never gets a chance to build. And then just going back to the user-led piece, it was very much in consultation with our adults with learning disabilities that we purchased the farm. And now it's about us kind of looking at what they need, what they want, and what they aspire to. For so many years, we spent going into places and trying to make a difference by infiltrating. Now we've created this really special place, and our adults with learning disabilities and children with learning disabilities are up front and centre, inviting the public in to their space. So it's really quite magical. And the other part, I suppose, of my work is that lobbying piece and collecting those stories, making sure those stories are up front and centre and that they are driving the organisation. So there's no projects in our organisation that we've created or delivered that we can't signpost back to one person or a group of individuals who expressed a need and helped to design the programme. And similarly, we've been on a journey with a lot of people, some individuals now who have been with us since they were in their teenage years and who are now hitting menopause. And we've adapted our services accordingly. And so, for example, in the last couple of years, we had a lot of our women coming to us, particularly in the base services that we provide, who were going through, starting to experience menopause symptoms. And there really had never been a programme delivered specifically for women with learning disabilities to understand what was happening in their bodies and to enable them to navigate that. So we worked with the women and said what would help, and they were very clear that we need to understand what's going on. We need to know who we can reach out to for support. We need to know what to expect at the next stage. And so we were actually able to work with the pharmacy, and we got some funding from BCPP through Community Development Health Network, which I'm also vice chair of. But it was completely legit. We got the funding fairly, and we basically were able to deliver a menopause programme for women with learning disability to make them better informed in and around what was going to happen. So the pharmacist would come out and take them through the journey of menopause and then help them and support them with some issues around their existing medication, with understanding the challenges to come, but also looking at what their options were with regards to managing that. So it's very much retained that user-led focus. And like I said, myself, Linda, the senior management team, we're all still delivering projects. And I think that's what makes CAN unique and makes me so proud of the user-led aspect, is that we're working with over 575 people now, from children to adults. And I can hand on heart say that I can name and I know a huge percentage of them, which is very unusual for an organisation. I don't always get their names right because I'm at a special age myself. And sometimes I forget, but we know the people and we spend time with them. We still go on holidays with the guys. You know, we provide short breaks, and myself and Linda make sure that we go on at least one holiday a year, one, trip a year, so that we're spending time hanging out. And we also do different workshops. We did a workshop there at Christmas making wreaths. And it's those conversations that you're having while doing an activity that actually are really inspiring and keep us really grounded and keep us really focused on what we could be doing better. And I suppose that's always been my mantra, is must do better. There's always more that we can give. We keep trying.
That is absolutely powerful. I love the way that you deliver services by listening to the end users. So it's very molded by it. I absolutely find it extremely inspiring.
It can be really, really hard because the funding landscape in Northern Ireland is difficult, and it would be very easy to fall into that trap of solely having government funding. I mean, at the minute we've 19 different strands of funding coming into our organisation, which is hard to manage, as you can imagine, as well, because you've got 19 different funders, from bean counters to innovators, and they all want to monitor you and evaluate the programs differently, and there's different kind of mechanisms in around financial returns, etc. But what that does is it gives us freedom and space to be innovative and to be bold. And certainly the income that we generate from our social enterprises gives us that little bit of ability to try things out.
I really like how you have embedded service user voice, not just in the programs, but in the strategy. So I was wondering, why is this so important for you? And what changes when people are genuinely trusted with power?
For us, it's everything. We cannot prescribe services to individuals, and the reality is that our individuals are very quick at telling you when you've got it wrong. And that's one of the beauties of learning disability, is that sometimes no filter is a good thing. And we do get it wrong sometimes, but they'll be very quick in telling us. And it's really quite a beautiful process. And for us, it's just, what one individual needs might not work for another. But if we can try our best to meet everybody's needs, then at least they're getting something out of that. We don't always get it right, but a big part of our work is around choice and empowerment. And for some of our guys that have come from school, they've never really had to make decisions. They've been told, oh, you're going into this room today and you're going to do X, or you're going into that room. And then for parents as well, whenever a parent has been told that they have a child with a learning disability or neurodiversity, there is that protective element. And parents tend to fall into the trap of doing everything for their individuals. So a big part of our job is actually unwrapping some of that kind of cotton wool that's been put in and around individuals, and encourage them to make choices and to make decisions and build their confidence and their self-esteem and their self-autonomy as well. And that's to say as well that one of the lessons that I learned very quickly when I worked at CAN was that, how do we learn? We learn by making mistakes. And for a lot of our adults with learning disabilities in particular, they were never allowed to make mistakes because somebody always picked up the pieces. So what we have done proactively is we've been positive risk takers. And we've pushed people out of their comfort zone. I mean, the joy of taking somebody on their first trip on an airplane to go to Berlin to World Congress with 3,000 people, I couldn't even capture how that felt. So there's probably a little bit of, I get a lot out of that as well. So it's not all kind of philanthropic. I get a big buzz out of giving people experiences and making sure that we're opening people's eyes to the potential. And a big part of that, even through our work, getting people into employment. For a lot of our guys, they've never thought that was even an option. And to be able to demonstrate through a process, we do a lot of pre-employment work in particular through our social enterprises, where we're taking individuals and we're getting them to experience what work feels like, what work looks like, and what the rules are around work, and even things like behaviours. It's mind-blowing, because then these individuals think, well, actually, I could go out to work like my brothers, and there's no reason why I couldn't bring some money home. And it's breaking that kind of preconception of I'll always be on benefits and I'll never be given back and I'll never have a meaningful day. So it's just really, really powerful.
It feels like CAN is not just supporting people, it's actively pushing back against all the systems and about trying to stop the underestimation that we have on them.
It's that holistic piece that we're really proud of. Like I said, we don't always get it right, but we have programs that support everybody from that kind of coming together therapy piece with young children through to hanging out with your mates, making decisions, planning activities, becoming activists in our own communities. We do a lot of work with our young people around how can we give back and how can we contribute and become more active in our community, whether it's doing litter picks or organising an event to raise money for bowel cancer. It's that kind of ethos that we try to encourage right then through our adults and then through into the other services, which are, we do everything from pre-employment to employability programs to fun and leisure. We take people on short breaks and holidays. We do such a range of activities, and then all the health program that we deliver as well. And it's just, we try to do that wraparound, but without creating a dependency, because that's my biggest thing has always been that funding tends to be short-lived. So from day one, we're looking at an exit strategy for every individual that comes in. I mean, we've been very, very lucky. I mean, we've nearly 20 years of lottery funding. So we've never really had a broken situation where we lost funding for any programme, because we continually innovate and change and respond to what's happening. However, at the same time, we're always conscious that this funding could run out, which is what happened with European funding going into then UK shared prosperity funding. So there's always an exit strategy from day one. So it's always about how can we build these individuals to the point where if this programme comes to an end, there is other stuff for them, or they are confident enough to continue on in their own communities. And the likes of the Best Buddies programme that we do, it's not about creating special things for people to do. It's about them doing stuff in the community, whether that be going to the cinema confidently, being able to book a ticket online, go to the cinema with your mates, or whether that be going out for dinner or going to the pub or going to a nightclub. And it's not a special nightclub for people with learning disabilities, but it's enabling them to actually have the confidence
themselves
and integrate into the community. Because for a lot of our guys as well, they go to special schools or they're taxied into learning support units in the local schools. So they don't ever build that community that children who haven't got learning disabilities and neurodiversities have by the time they leave school. And quite often that's the biggest problem, is that friendship piece.
Absolutely.
As well.
And I think that's very important for all of us, like that connection, to feel that we belong to a group of people or a community. So the fact that you are helping bridge that life skills with their sense of self, I think is very relevant. And I love the way you're doing that in a very, let's say, kind of challenging the traditional way to do things in terms of care and support, which I think is very inspiring. And I think most of us should be doing that from our own perspective, try to steer away from differences and try to focus on, so what is the similarity? So more,
and what things can you do? It's, and can, I mean, we're, the name is Compass Advocacy Network. And initially it was the group themselves, the users themselves chose the name Compass, because Compass shows you where to go. And that was quite magical. I mean, it's a big mouthful, Compass Advocacy Network. So we've shortened that now to CAN. And we use the I can,
of course,
you can, we can, and how we can all come together and make a change. So, and it's quite powerful, and it's the underpinning thread that now runs through the organisation, is that speaking up for ourselves with confidence.
I love that. And there, I think it's very dignifying about being trusted to contribute. It's not just as a service user, but it's as a worker, as a colleague, as a citizen, as a member of society, which I think is very strong. Alongside frontline work, you're also deeply involved in shaping policy through health boards, regional working groups, and partnerships. From your perspective, where are the biggest gaps or misunderstandings within health and social care systems when it comes to learning disability, autism, and mental health?
I think the policy is there, but where it all falls apart is when that policy is being delivered in practice. So I think we see, and particularly in Northern Ireland, we've now got a learning disability strategy. We've got the disability work strategy. We've got disability strategy, disability policy, you know, and those are all grand. But if there's never money attached to them or a delivery plan or outcomes that have to be delivered against, then they're just pieces of paper. So my biggest frustration, and the frustration of my colleagues and peers, is that we hear time and time again how important it is that people with learning disability have equal lives and can do what you and I do. But then when it actually comes down to it, the funding and the money doesn't follow through to support organisations to make that happen. And that's incredibly frustrating. In Northern Ireland, we have 5 trusts, all doing things differently. We have in the Northern Trust area, we have the Day Opportunities Programme. It's a real postcode lottery as to what services you get, what support you get. And you'll have a very different model in the Western Trust. You'll have a very different model in the Southeastern Trust. And it's a real frustration of ours. We worked incredibly closely. I mean, COVID was actually quite a remarkable period for CAN and for the policy work that we did, because all of a sudden we found ourselves in a room with policymakers, albeit virtually, and we've retained those relationships since, and we've been able to really influence the way that the policies are written. But again, it falls down to that delivery and to the mechanism by which we hold our civil servants to account. We can do everything within our power to put our people with learning disabilities in front of the powers that be. But really, it's that next piece that so often falls apart. And the frustration then around the lip service. Yes, there's always time for a photo op or a photo call on the steps of Stormont with a person with a learning disability. But when it comes down to it and the actual services aren't being delivered on the ground, or they're only being delivered to those who shout loudest, then that's where it becomes really frustrating. So, I mean, we advocate on behalf of individuals. We now run the advocacy service for the Northern Trust, and we're continually finding ourselves up against brick walls and trying to have to navigate those is a huge part of our work. But we continue. And when I think back to how the world has changed since institutionalisation in the 80s, 90s and 2000s through to now, there's no going back. People with learning disabilities know what they want, and they know that they're entitled to an equal life, and we'll continue to fight with them to make sure that happens.
And just at all at how a small organization, quote unquote, like can influence a larger system. I think that what you're doing by being advocates, by being in the room, trying to engage with people who are.
Yeah. I think what we do is we demonstrate how what we do makes a difference to lives. And it's, when you look at it, it's a really cost-effective way of enabling people to support themselves rather than putting in a statutory service or individuals locking up GP surgeries or ending up presenting at A&E. We're actually trying to provide that autonomy for individuals that means that they are out and they're active. And actually, our adults with learning disabilities come up with an analogy that social care should be like a first aid kit. You know where it is, it's well stocked, and it's continually replenished. But you only pull it off when you need it.
Absolutely.
And then you put it back. And that's what good social care looks like for our adults with learning disabilities. And unfortunately, for a lot of them, it's not like that. So I suppose we're filling the gap where that doesn't exist, and we try to be that first aid kit for individuals to stop them ever having to go down that road to access. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to prove a negative, And I spend a lot of my time, we do a lot of work with the University of Ulster and Queen's University in particular, researching the different programs that we do, the different interventions, whether it be diabetes or the interventions over COVID or loneliness programs that we do with our older people with learning disabilities. And it can be quite hard to prove a negative once somebody has been with CAN to then say, what would their life have looked like if they hadn't had CAN? You know, it can be very hard to prove that negative, but we know that our people are happier and they're more engaged, they're more involved, and they may feel like much more part of a community with us by their side, but they are very much the drivers. We used to talk about we lay the tracks and they drive the train. I suppose that analogy is still live today. And even with our staff team, at every staff meeting, we have quarterly staff team kind of training. And every staff training session we start with, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for adults with learning disabilities.
Absolutely.
And everything starts with them. If you're at CAN because you want to pay your mortgage or you just want a job, then this might not be the right place for you. Because the reality is that it's the people with learning disabilities that matter. And if we're not delivering services that they want or need, then they can walk. And we would actually challenge staff on a regular basis to say, this is not just a job.
It
There's
has
a
an
vocation.
ultimate purpose, and I think that's really relevant.
Sometimes people forget and we all get frustrated. I mean, I've had plenty of frustrations over the years, particularly in and around some of the brick walls that we've hit and the barriers that we've come across. But the reality is that if we can walk away saying that we've changed individuals' lives or the outcome has been very different because we've been involved, then we've done what we need to be doing. We've done the right thing and we can say that we were there, we saw, we helped.
Absolutely. I think leadership in this space is not very easy. It's not easy at all, actually, especially when resources are very tight and the needs are complex. And, it's very frustrating somehow in a very brief period of time I was there in that position. What has been the hardest part of leading CAN through change over the years?
Like you said, it can be a really lonely place. You know, there's a lot of pressure on your shoulders. And even though I have a phenomenal board now, I have a brilliant board, incredibly supportive, very dynamic, all very much positive risk takers. In the past, I haven't had that. And that has been an incredibly lonely place because I felt like I'm carrying the responsibility. So going through change, I suppose, I find change quite liberating. I've never really been scared of it. Where it has been hard is where individuals that are on the journey with us do not want to change. It's about bringing them along with us. And I mean, I talked about my colleague who was already with CAN at the start, and she was one of my biggest barriers. And for me, it was about demonstrating the benefits of that change process that brought her on the journey. And now she's the biggest advocate for change. And she's been by my side the whole journey and is now my chief operating officer. So it shows that it can happen. Sometimes it's just been that deep breath and taking that step.
Love to end with a few quick reflections questions. So, what does real inclusion mean to you beyond the buzzword?
Real inclusion means that we're not having a conversation about inclusion.
Right? I agree completely.
You know, it's about, for me, it's about people with learning disabilities, neurodiversities, whoever, you know, just living the same way as we do. Will we ever get there? Probably never, but we will continue to strive as best we can. And, you know, we used to talk about integration and now we talk about inclusion. And the reality is that it's something that we need to keep moving towards. And with society being so divided now, and it's very easy to pick on the vulnerable. And it is very, very important that there are people out there that are standing up and saying, no, you don't do that. I would love to see a world where CAN no longer exists because it's no longer needed.
Absolutely. In those lines, one thing you wish policymakers truly understood.
I suppose it's the ramifications of their decision making. And it's about understanding. Quite often there's arbitrary decisions made at government level, and there's really no understanding of how that then impacts on the ground. They need to be talking to people on the ground and making those decisions with people with lived experience. We've seen over the last number of years, even most recently with our Labour government, making decisions almost blind to the reality. The perfect example was taking the winter fuel payments off the pensioners, not understanding that not all pensioners were using the winter fuel payments for a wine box. The reality was that they were genuinely using that to put oil in the tank or to buy coal or to pay their electricity bill. Talk to the people on the ground who understand how that will work out. We've had so many situations where policies have been put in place and they're just unworkable or they're unaffordable, which is the other thing. And when statutory organisations try and deliver services for individuals, it tends to be expensive and time limited and personnel change. And the reality is that I'm here after 2 decades. I'm still fighting the good fight and I'm not going anywhere fast. But in government, and within local government, people change all the time. People move on, and a lot of the good practice is personality driven, and we need to move away from that constant cycle of fixing things, breaking things, fixing things, breaking things, and a sticky plaster kind of economy.
I agree completely. And finally, what does creating change look like for you right now?
Well, right now we're actually developing, so we bought the farm in 2021 and we are developing a therapeutic wellbeing village on the site for children and adults with learning disabilities. And change looks like turning an old stone cottage into 3 accommodation units so people can actually come and stay on the farm, which will not only provide much needed short breaks for families, but will also then generate an income to put back into the charity to help us continue to do the work that we're doing. The plan down the line is that we will have multiple units on the site, and change will be moving away from that statutory funding, having much more corporate partnerships where it's a very equal playing field. They're getting stuff out of it, we're getting stuff out of it, rather than somebody coming and painting a fence and us trying to unpaint it for the next 6 years. But also that transactional piece where we're actually valued and seen as contributing to society, and that people want to come on the journey with us.
Love it. Janet, thank you so much for this conversation. But not just that, but for the way you lead. I think that is really, really impactful and it's very inspiring for many people out there. What you have shared today reminds us that change doesn't always start with grand gestures. Sometimes it just starts with listening and with trusting people and with refusing to accept systems that exclude and quietly building better ones from the ground up. I think that you are a living proof that when leadership is rooted in dignity, in collaboration, and belief in people's potential, real transformation follows. So, for our listeners, thank you for being part of Conversations with Agents of Change. If this episode resonated with you, please share it, reflect on it, and consider how you can help to create more inclusive spaces in your own communities. Until next time, keep asking questions, keep listening, and keep creating change. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
This podcast is produced by the Change Impact Group.